You're listening to Maneuvering Mondays, a podcast about transforming work culture. And your hosts today are AK
and Ivana Rosendal.
And have you ever felt like you're more busy than ever, yet somehow nothing seems to move? Like meetings keep coming and decisions get stuck and the energy starts to fade. Because that's where I think we find Marie in Maneuvering Monday. She is full of good intentions. She is surrounded by smart people, but she's just caught up in this dysfunctional system at Zebra Apps. So welcome to another one of our book swap episodes. And today we are so happy to have you, Jurriaan, with us in the studio. You're the author of more than one book, but the book we're going to talk about today is your book called Unblock. And we're going to discuss how organizations can be unblocked. And you are an organizational designer. You help organizations see the real barriers in their way and of course, help people remove them. And I think like this is just such a perfect match for Maneuvering Monday and the story that we follow here. And maybe
thanks for having me, AK. I agree. The story really sounded like a company that needed to be unblocked. So super excited to be talking about it with you.
Exactly.
And you and you and I have been connected on LinkedIn for quite a while, and I believe probably I am the one who connected to you many years ago when I was a keen follower of The Ready and their work, and I think that is how we became connected. And then a little while ago, you actually reached out to me, and we fell into conversation about what are we up to, and we decided to do this episode together, potentially one of the many things we might be doing together.
Who knows?
So very excited to have you here, and just reading both of your books. I'm quite excited about the way you think and how you structure the way you think about organizations. So very happy to have you on the show.
Thanks. And I also had a blast reading Maneuvering Monday at the pool in France during my holidays. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is like the ideal spot where I wish our book would be read.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And Jurriaan, how did you come into this line of work and become an organizational designer?
Yeah, I started out as an IT nerd, actually. Software developer, IT project manager, chief technology officer. And I increasingly discovered that the real bottleneck in organizational speed was not IT anymore, but it became the rest of the organization and whatever that means. So I started obsessing about how do we get large groups of people to collaborate and how do we actually change the organizational system so that people that are in IT or outside of IT, actually the experts that are doing the value creation, can work in an environment where they're enabled to do the best work. And that's how I started to read up and start consulting on that topic.
Very cool. I think it's interesting that a lot of like deep thinkers about organizations have started their work in IT. I wonder if you feel like it's an advantage that you're used to thinking about systems.
Yeah, yes and no. Like computers respond really differently than people. So that's something I had to learn. And I'm still struggling with sometimes. And yes, I think complexity is a thing in the software and in IT. So it's helpful to always think about with a systemic perspective. I also think a lot of the people that grew up through IT came across new ways of working through the Agile Manifesto that was invented 20 years ago. Which basically changed the default process of software development from one that was really plan-driven and top-down driven to one that's much more collaborative and iterative. And people that, including myself, have seen the value of that and what is possible when you transform and really want to invite other departments and other units and other functions to do that all the way up until the boardroom.
It makes so much sense. And I think that when I read Unblock, I felt like it could have been like a piece to go together with Maneuvering Monday because it felt like almost a toolbox for Marie that she could have applied. And I think that if she had done that, she would have probably gotten better results faster. And I think her journey is so full of all these difficult people and behaviors and dysfunctional like systemic dysfunctions that I think could really benefit from some of the. I think you have so many like tactics and actual pragmatic advice for how to approach these things. So it was such a
thanks.
pleasure.
And that was the whole point of the second book. So my first book, Formula X, is similar to Maneuvering Monday in the sense that it's a business novel, and we will talk about that more later. But the Unblock book really is on the cover it says a practical guide for leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you have already thought about this stuff, and a lot of leaders that we work with actually already are pretty progressive in their thinking, but they don't necessarily know how to start, and that's where they get stuck. So I wanted to write a book that helps these leaders and inspire them to actually start making some steps.
Yeah, and I think that worked out really well.
Well, let's get a little bit closer to our actual books. Jurriaan, I wonder if you could kind of, in your words, summarize what are some of the key points in Unblock?
Yeah, so Unblock revolves around, first of all, the concept of aligned autonomy. So this idea that the best results in a complex world can be created by autonomous teams that have end-to-end responsibility over delivering a certain amount of value, but that autonomy is also constrained and aligned with the bigger picture and the overarching strategy of the organization. And it's a balancing act. And then the book touches upon six areas where I see organizations get blocked a lot and how to improve them. It starts with strategy. Sometimes the strategy itself is a blocker for success. It goes then into steering and anything around outcome-driven measurement and just figuring out how to move forward and continuously steer. It goes into decision-making, which is something that is often blocked or slow or could be improved a lot. We connect to meetings. So how do we actually get rid of our meeting culture that is not so effective and install really effective specific meetings for getting things done? We touch upon teamwork. So all the things that you can do to create a highly collaborative environment, to accelerate team development and improve psychological safety. And then the sixth one is ownership. So how do you create the environment where people take ownership and show up with their best ideas and best work? And it's a modular book, so it doesn't necessarily prescribe a framework that you have to go through from A to Z. It's really, the idea is that you go and look at the table of contents and say, oh, actually, I think we're currently struggling most with, decision making. And then you pick up that chapter and start thinking. So it's a modular book in that sense.
Yeah, and each module comes also with a bit of story, which I enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, that was the most fun part to write. The thing is, I work with clients all across the world, and I'm often constrained by NDAs. So, the things we encounter are sometimes really ridiculous and painful, and I don't really want to put company names in there, connected to that. So it's a bit shameful. So what I try to do is to create 12 short stories that illustrate the point of the chapter in a sometimes ridiculous and funny, but also painfully recognizable way. So that you're like, oh yeah, we have that, yeah, and then you can maybe dial it up and then so that's what I try to do. Those stories are short and sweet and sometimes connected to each other, but often also independent of each other.
Yeah. And that's actually close to what our original idea was with Maneuvering Monday. We wanted to make like a piece where we had a full fictional story, and then we wanted to include some tools in the end of each chapter that our readers could apply to kind of tackle the problems that Marie faced. But we actually ended up leaving out the toolbox part in this first book because our publisher advised to keep it to one or the other. But I think it does work out really well in the way you did it, where I think the toolbox is like the primary part, and then you use the story to showcase the problems. And just for listeners who have not read Maneuvering Monday yet, this is a work fiction piece where we follow a fictional female leader called Marie, who is navigating this company where there's a problem with retention and people are leaving. So she's in HR, and she gets the task to kind of figure out why this is happening and to make people stay. And that leads her into this long process of trying to find out what the problem is. And she tries different tactics that fail. And we try to show here that you can have all the best intentions. You can think that you follow, the right process, but then in the end, because it's people and human beings, it gets super complicated and complex, and you cannot. You end up in a completely different place than where you thought you would. I think that's without spoiling the story too much. That's what Maneuvering Monday is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I liked it a lot because of its realness. You know, you said earlier, like if she had the book, maybe she would have been more successful. I'm not sure. Like it's human complexity and organizational change is a tough problem and requires lots of different factors and is always different. So yeah, with any toolbox and any process and any business book you pick up, it's always going to be messy and sometimes painful, but also sometimes super exciting and fun. So yeah, I appreciated the realness of the story in that sense.
Thank you.
And from my perspective, we also. I think it's more interesting to get other people's solutions to the problems that we present in Maneuvering Monday than necessarily coming up with them ourselves. At least it's more fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I think another thing is that we've done this podcast for a while where we released a piece of the book and then we asked intelligent people to give advice to Marie. And the same as what you say, we had a fictional character that people could give advice instead of saying, Ivana and I did this at our job. It's like a bit more, it's a safe space. And then our guest experts can just tell us that she's an idiot and it doesn't, it doesn't offend us because it's not us.
Right.
And I think that was really helpful also for that.
Great. Well, now we are at the point where we're going to start swapping stories from our books. And the way that this segment works is I give an example of a storyline from Maneuvering Monday, and then we apply Unblock tools to that segment. So first up, I would like us to talk about leadership teams, and that leadership teams are also teams. And in Maneuvering Monday, the CEO of Zebra Apps, her name is Natalie, she meets with her leadership team one-to-one. They do not meet as a team, and she manages them by setting specific targets for each area. Without seeing how all the pieces fit together in achieving the company strategy across all the departments. So from your perspective, Jurriaan, is it sufficient that there's one person whose brain kind of imagines all the different scenarios, how the different pieces fit together, or which alternatives are there?
Yeah, I think the example that you're giving in the book is actually not that common. So I'm curious where you got it. Maybe you found it in one of your organizations, but I have seen other situations where there's a leader that does meet with the team and still calls all the shots and still dominates the conversation. I think that's more common, where one leader feels to be in control and just gives orders. Even though the group is gathering, it's still not really gathering together. And the other thing you said, like leadership teams are also teams. Well, quite often they're not. It's a point I make in our book, that a leadership team is often just a group of people trying to battle for their own individual priorities. And sometimes you see dysfunctions where the individuals, they try to look good in front of the leader, so they get rewarded, and it's really, so if you want to become a team as a leadership team, it's a choice you need to make, and it's something you need to invest in. So that means that you take the time to get to know everybody, and people get to know people across. And also the second thing is, you can, as a leadership team, you set outcomes that are interdependent, because often the real value is created across different departments in collaboration between. And the best leadership teams are leadership teams where the peers hold each other accountable for doing the thing that's necessary, rather than the top leader always being the one in control and always the person talking and calling the shots. So yeah, it's really a question of what type of team would you like to be, and yeah, obviously good teams are interdependent. People take accountability. People think also through what other functions are going through. And have this collaborative mindset cross-functionally.
And you're in Unblock, you introduced this concept of a 90-day cadence. Could that be applicable to a leadership team?
Of course, yeah, really. I think the goal setting processes in companies vary a lot, but it's super helpful to have a rhythm where you say like our rhythm is 90 days, could be longer, could be shorter, depending on the type of company you're in or the type of situation you're in. But we like 90 days because it's far enough to actually create a lot of impact. And allows you to think a little bit longer term. And it's short enough that the things you're writing down as your goals are actually tangible and real. Who can actually talk about what is going to happen 1 year from now, right? That's a long time. That's a fake. So we often invite teams to think 2 years ahead and 90 days ahead, and not much in between. So yeah.
Can I ask? I think you said something really interesting in the beginning about alignment and autonomy, and this idea of giving autonomy, but also having like a direction that the teams can follow. What if say you have a leadership team that does not give any alignment? Like you don't have a direction. Is there still a way to like how can a team handle that situation?
Yeah, they will basically be in firefighting mode, just reacting to anything that drops into their inbox. Yeah. And when that happens, often you see teams that are overloaded because they're not saying no to anything because everything seems as important. They have the feeling that they have to do all the things that are being thrown at them. So yeah, it's a trade-off. It's nice to have freedom and just do whatever you want, but the reality is then often somebody else or some factor outside of your team will decide what priority is. And it's much better if teams take ownership and say, well, you know what, this is important and that is not. And they start having those conversations.
Because that was I was thinking about like, is there anything the teams can do if they don't get this direction? If that's just, a condition that they have?
Yeah, so the brave teams, the courageous teams, then go and make those heuristics themselves and say, you know what, if we think about what we find important, it's going to be this and that. And then what you sometimes see is teams going to have a conversation with the leaders and say, this is our priority list and we're not going to do the other stuff because you're overloading us. But that does require a lot of courage and a lot of confidence. And it's really dependent on how those leaders react, because maybe those leaders are still going to say, well, it's nice that you come up with your to-do list, but actually you need to do all the things and you need to do it next week. So if that is the dynamic, then all bets are off.
Sink or swim.
Yeah, sink or swim.
Okay, well, another point that I would like to discuss with you, Jurriaan, is how metrics can actually skew outcomes. In Maneuvering Monday, one of, I think, my favorite characters is Jenny, who is the VP of development. She does her best, given what she knows about how to run the development department. So she abolishes meetings among the developers, and she just wants them to sit down and code. She wants them to sit at their desks and write code in silence, and like all the whiteboards are banished to an abandoned hallway. So her measure is basically how much code do the developers produce per hour or minute or something along those lines, and that kind of skews the incentives and will ultimately lead to a way worse product. So what are some of the challenges of measuring what work looks like, and how can you actually create an incentive structure that promotes what actually matters?
Yeah, when I read Jenny's character, it was quite funny because I also questioned myself, like, how did she ever become the VP of development with that mindset? Who recruited her into that role? Was it Marie? No, was it maybe someone else? I don't know. Mark? Was it Mark? I don't know. It was, it's a very strange mindset to have. But it's also common. I'm not sure it's so common to measure developers by lines of code anymore, because most people understand that developers would just create more code and worse software. But it is common to look at, I don't know, team velocity or some kind of other artificial metric that somehow in their mind translates into effective work. And this is the real problem. Like it's skewing the idea of productivity and confusing efficiency with effectiveness. And it's really common. Like there's another example that I use in my book about the UK National Health Service. At one point had problems with the emergency rooms, where people had to wait for a long time, and they just couldn't get the service, get the medical help that people needed when they it's an emergency room, so people come there with real problems. So then somebody in the government said, let's put a target in place where everybody needs to be helped in 95% of the cases within 4 hours, which is still a long time, and it doesn't sound that bad. It sounds like, oh, maybe that is reasonable. 4 hours, it's still a long time, but it's a good intention. But then what happened was the hospital directors were pushed pretty hard to implement this, and this ultimately led to really strange outcomes. Where when somebody was being brought in with an ambulance, they had to wait in the ambulance outside of the emergency room because the clock wouldn't start. And then if you were in the department, in the ER department, you would be moved into the corridor or admitted to the hospital right before the 4-hour clock would end, just to make sure that they would achieve this metric. So it's really just something you have to be very careful about if you're going to make measures a target. It ceases to be a good measure. I think it's that Goodhart's law or Conway's law. I don't know. I forget. There's somebody smart who said this. Tell me what your target is, and I'm going to tell you how to behave, is what Goldratt said. So it's really like humans are extremely creative, and especially if the system incentivizes them to do something, they will do so, and it might create side effects. So the solution here is to involve the teams that you're measuring into figuring out what the metrics should be. And let them tell you, what actually creates value here.
Exactly.
And of course, in terms of software development, it should be customer outcomes. It should be happy customers. It should be features that are valuable and being used. And so often in software development, we only look at shipping the code and shipping the feature at a certain deadline and meeting the plan. While what really good software development teams, they measure if the features are actually used, and if the features that are used are actually also creating the impact and the behavior you want to see. So it's more advanced, and it requires a more advanced model of what is actually customer value and how should we measure the behavior that people apply when they're using our product.
That makes a lot of sense. The metrics one, I think most people who've worked in a large corporation have some sort of horror story about how they can skew incentives completely absurdly. It's one of my favorite topics to discuss with people in large organizations. Like, tell me your war story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I think in Jenny's case, it's also a question of the illusion of control somehow. Like because she's under so much pressure to deliver on her targets, and it gives her like the illusion that she can actually, that she is in control and she can control what's going on. But in reality, it just gets worse and worse. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to the next section that I wanted to discuss, and which is about how employees can own the outcomes. This has been like one of the most controversial things in our initial write-through of the book, where most of our podcast guests who commented on the story were like most upset with us. In Maneuvering Monday, we have a coalition of the willing that forms, who are trying to bring zebra apps back into some sort of well-functioning state. So they meet in secret and plan how to get the company out of trouble. They both include people who are currently at zebra apps and people who are no longer at zebra apps who have left earlier, including Richard, who is one of the co-founders of the organization, but who has since left. And the leadership team as such is not involved in this, even though some of the members of the leadership team are. So when we spoke to our guests while we're writing the book, almost everyone said this is horribly wrong. How could they possibly do that? This is like obstructing the company. And for me, actually, I was surprised by this reaction, because we talk a lot about like delegating decision making and responsibility to our employees. So is there such a thing as too much empowerment of employees? And how can you distribute power in an organization?
Right. Yeah. I also don't agree with your guests.
Yes.
I think if you have an uprise or rebellion from the bottom, if they have the good intentions, I'm just assuming that they are there because they care about the company and they really want to save it. It's a really good problem to have as a leader. And the smart leaders, they engage with that and they look like, oh my God, we already have a really good group of people that really have the best intentions to improve this company. We already have a group of people to work with. Rather, if the opposite is true, you're in much more trouble, where if nobody cares about the company and just, goes in and clocks out, and don't want to change anything while you as a leader really want to, then it's much, much harder. So I would say, look, work with that energy, work with that power. You do have to constrain it, probably. You do have to say, okay, I'm going to engage with it. I'm going to step in, but also let's keep it somehow constrained because it might get out of hand. You don't want to have people rioting or running out of the building, you want to keep the group somewhat calm, but use the positive energy that's in there. I would say sometimes change does come from the bottom or from the edge of the organization. I'd like to say it's not necessarily the bottom or the top. It's like the outside line, the outside of the organization that is actually creating the value and is interacting with the market and the customer. Those people, they often have the best perspective and the earliest sense of something is off here. For example, like customer service, like the service agents, the call agents, they're often not paid well. There's lots of change in people there, but companies that understand it well, they invest a lot in those departments because they talk to the customers every day. They know what is wrong in their process, or they know what's wrong in their product. So yeah, there's a long way of saying work with that. The other question you asked is like, can there be too much empowerment? Well, these people were not given autonomy in any way. They just took it, and sure, like if you have autonomy and no alignment, then you get all sorts of people just running after their own fun projects and you don't get the outcome you want. So that's also not a helpful culture if you want to achieve any goals. It's a fun culture to work in for some people. Other people would drown in this autonomy. Exactly. Yeah, and other people just really want to know when am I successful? It's a human need to hear from the group of people working with that you're valued and the thing you're doing is valued and useful. So it's actually helpful to have constraints and some boundaries and some goals and targets. So yeah, that's my answer.
I think in Unblock you talk about fostering autonomy with decision rights.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit more about how to do that? How you would go about that? Yeah.
Yeah, often when we work with leaders, they're like, oh, I already empowered my people. They should step in and just take action. Why are they not doing that? Why are they not taking ownership and taking initiative? And then when we go look and talk to those people, they're like, yeah, the leader tells me that I can do certain things, but I'm not really sure how much, to what extent. And in the book, there's also the story of the playground where there's a research that was done at one point where we were, kids in a playground, when there's no fence around the playground, they stay close to their teacher. They always want to keep line of sight to the teacher so that they know if what we're doing is okay. Am I going too far? I just to stay close there. But if there's a fence around it, they know the boundaries. They know to what extent they can play. They even go and play on the fence, and they don't have to stick close to the teacher. So this is a long way of saying that boundaries can actually create a lot of freedom. Decision rights is one example of that. Decision rights is an example where, if there's an explicit agreement that I can decide these things and I have full autonomy, I don't have to be afraid to get a kick in my head from the leaders because I'm breaking some kind of rule that is unwritten and unspoken. Because that's the problem if you don't have decision rights. We are all going to assume what they are. And if you are a brave or courageous person or an ignorant person, you just take a lot of action. But other people will be much more careful. So it doesn't create an equal playing field for everyone.
Can you tell us more about this autonomy and alignment, these two important concepts?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, autonomy is a really good way of solving complex problems because you get rid of the need for leaders to be telling everybody what to do and to knowing all the things. So creating an environment where there's a lot of autonomy makes sure that people have the ability to solve complex problems themselves among each other, and it's just a faster way to do complex value creation. But the alignment piece is there to say that all the people that are running after certain things together, it should add up to the outcome that the whole company is looking for, and that's the alignment piece. So it's two principles to balance.
And also, I would just very self-reflectively admit here that I'm one of those people where I thrive so well in autonomy, and I will just do stuff and have fun with it. And for like one of the biggest realizations that I had as a leader is that is not how everybody works. People do need boundaries and constraints, and they need to understand, well, what is my playing field and what am I allowed to do? It took me a long time to understand this because I was like, well, I'm giving you all the freedom.
Exactly.
Go do.
Yeah.
Because that's what I need. But once I understood that is not how all people work, I was like, oh, like I have been creating horrible conditions for most of my employees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have a question, just a follow-up question within this topic. So let's say that we have a leadership team that gives great alignment. The people know exactly what is expected, or at least like some of the how they are supposed to be a success. So what do you do as a leadership team if you see that the teams are not making the decision you had hoped,
Right.
and they go in another direction than you were trying to set? How do you work with that without over micromanaging?
Yeah, that's a challenge of self-control. So knowing, I mean, the challenge here is, can you approach those teams with curiosity first? Because often you do know more than the teams that are involved because you have a broader perspective and you have just more time to think about the whole thing instead of the individual thing. So be curious about why the teams are going into a certain direction before course correcting them, and engage in a conversation where either you get a new perspective and really be open to a new perspective, or they gain a new perspective because you share information that they didn't have at the time when they made that decision. And this is really the dialogue that creates the future. So then ultimately, if you do have this dialogue, the teams get bought into the new direction, which is something that we often miss. But because when I'm saying no, the team says we're going to do A, and you say no, we're just going to do B, the team will follow that order often. Some people do, but they won't be as engaged with it because they either don't fully understand why the leader made that decision, or they don't agree with it, or they didn't have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think it's also, to me, it's interesting how, like, when you work as a leader in an organization where you want to promote autonomy, I feel like every time you take a directive approach as a leader, you kind of take away an opportunity for the team to get a learning. And I think you also talk about, using failure as a way to learn in the book as well.
Yeah.
Which is also a central topic of Maneuvering Monday, or at least we try to show these exercises you can do as a team to celebrate failure.
Exactly, yeah. Fika.
Is that Dutch?
That's a good moment for... No, it is Swedish, actually, not Danish. Sorry. But Ivana
Cake?
was laughing, so maybe you know it.
Yeah. Well, it's like the cake, right?
Yeah. And we even the Danes make fun of the Swedes for their fika traditions. But it's a great way for people to come together. have a ritual for informal conversation.
Yep.
So I
stuff
think
happens during the fika that doesn't happen in the meetings.
Yeah.
That's actually a good one. We have a lot of fika in Manuring Monday. There's a lot of cinnamon buns.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I was thinking about it. And then I realized that's a Swedish thing, not a Danish thing. But it is the cinnamon buns that is the fika in this book.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have a lot of coffee, just a coffee machine, but we don't have a lot of those rituals.
No. I don't think we have that either here, but I think we would like to.
Yeah, more cinnamon buns.
We served cinnamon buns at our book launch, and everyone were so confused.
Really?
We had champagne and cinnamon buns, and people were like, why are we
They didn't read the book before, of course, no. And you had zebras there and Post-its and whatever you have here on the cover.
We had a huge zebra balloon.
I saw that, yeah.
That I still have at my home, and my child loves it.
It's one of the learnings that, like, for us, it was such a perfect thing to have at the book launch. But of course, it made no sense to people at all. So our own internal
They will
joke.
remember it, which is good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the next topic, which is excellent meetings and collaborative decision making. So one of the examples from Maneuvering Monday is when Marie kind of rediscovers the company values that were already created some time ago by Natalie, the CEO. One of the things she tries to kind of figure out whether these values are still valid is to gather the leadership team for an offsite and have them kind of understand and either buy into or discard these values. So she's attempting like a collaborative decision-making process. We can always debate whether she's doing a good job or not, but she tries. And then like that whole thing ends dramatically, and the CFO resigns after this, and one of Marie's employees, Sheila, ends up in tears. But that whole drama apart, how do you create a collaborative decision-making process that actually works?
Yeah, I'm curious if you have a few sentences of what the process Marie is using, if you remember that.
Yeah. So she starts by she takes away everybody's phones. Then she has Natalie, the CEO, introduce what the values are. And then she chooses to divide and conquer. So each individual leadership team member gets a separate session in a different room with one of Marie's team, and they discuss like their personal values and how they apply to Zebra Apps's values. And then they reconvene and discuss, well, do we still feel like these values capture our essence as a leadership team?
And how do they decide then?
Basically, they end up looking at Natalie and asking,
exactly.
"Are these still? Are this
Can
still
you
right?"
Just tell us if this is what.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like a decision-making process. It sounds like a brainstorm session, which is nice. But ultimately, it sounds like Natalie is gathering input and wants to hear yes or no, or like, I don't know. The process is not that clear. I would say I have a couple of reactions to this question. First of all, I try to avoid tinkering with company values as much as I can, because often every company that I go to, the values are 80% the same. So they're quite meaningless in the end. It's all about, collaboration, innovation, taking ownership. It's transparency. I don't know. Sometimes it's transparency. Often it's not. I don't know. Like, people overestimate what company values do for them. They don't do much, honestly. What would be much more helpful to talk about, I think, in their situation is trade-offs. So, what is one of the values that they have? Do you know?
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Okay, well, curiosity, that's great. And also, what is the trade-off of curiosity? Can we describe what we're going to favor curiosity over So what is the thing that we're not doing if we're having curiosity? And then express that as an even overstatement, which is one of the things I have in the book. So that's one thing. Like, what is the actual useful thing to talk about rather than the values? Values are really personal, and an organization doesn't really have values. The people that work there have values, and the people have behaviors that we find acceptable or not acceptable. So that's the first thing I would say, like the thing that they're quote unquote deciding about. The other thing is the decision-making process. One thing that I think Marie missed is the state that the people were in when they were pushing them into this process. So the fact that the CFO resigns and one of the other colleagues ends up in tears was just the thing that was about to happen anyway. It was either accelerated or it just happened at the time within that. And this is just one of the things, if you're facilitating change, you always have to acknowledge that whatever is going to happen in the room is the thing that was about to happen anyway. And it's not the process fault. It's also not the facilitator's fault. It's just what the state the system is in at the time. And sometimes I had to throw over the whole process and just talk about what is happening right now. Why is this person in tears? What is actually going on, really? And then just rip up the script. But if you really want to create a collaborative decision-making process, I think it is helpful that that somebody brings a proposal. In this case, Natalie, great. She has a proposal of what the value should be. And then she can go around the room and gathers questions first and then reactions. And then she's going to ask, like, okay, if this is the proposal and I'm hearing the reactions, I'm going to integrate these things into my new proposal. Does anybody have an objection to adopting these values? And that is a thing I also describe in the book as one of the tools in the toolbox where you can actually get everybody's input, allow people to object if they really object to something, and still drive momentum and going forward. Decision-making processes are they require some thought, and often they're not really thought out well, in my experience.
That makes sense. I love the part that's whatever happened in the room was about to happen anyway, because that is also like my experience that there is no perfect facilitation process, and people don't just come in as blank slates. They're in the middle of something.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I do think that it's a nice segue into the last part of our book swap session, which is talk a bit about the culture program that Marie is trying to launch, because she does really decide to go to the company values as her kind of gateway into working with the culture, and she launches this culture program. We also learned that she has a background in management consulting, so she's probably like drawing from her, backpack or toolbox from back then. But as we know, she gets totally embroiled in the problems of the company that are actually also related to the product market fit and revenue model more than the culture maybe. But what are your thoughts on like corporate culture? And is it a separate thing from the revenue model and operating model, or how does this all fit together?
Well, culture is accumulation of everybody's behavior in an organization. It's what people do, how people behave, and it's shaped by decisions the company is making or not making, and or how leaders show up or don't show up. So it's always a result of something. It's not something you can influence directly. There's a management thinker out there, Niels Fleging. He said culture is read only. It's a shadow of something else that's happening in front of the light. And so a culture program in itself, which really depends on how to approach it, but it's very hard to say, you know what, we should change the behavior in this group to have more curiosity. Well, that's great, but you have to consider all the forces that are at play and all the things that are pressing on people's behavior that does that. Because people are extremely adaptable. They will adapt to the system that is around them. They will show. So this is also what happens a lot when you hire a star performer from a star company, and you put them in your corporate system, and you expect that they will magically do beautiful things. the reality is that the person will adapt to the system around them really quickly, or don't and get frustrated and would just run out of the door again. So really, in terms of culture programs and culture, you need to really take a systems thinking perspective. And if the thing that is really creating lots of dysfunction and problems in the organization is the business model and the product market fit, then that's the thing that needs to be addressed in the culture program. There's always one most urgent tension that is just causing the most problems.
I love that quote. That culture is read only.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that it's not a phenomenon that you can influence directly. I think for me, that has been my general realization about work. That's like how you operate, and you like all the things are related to each other, but and need to be continuously realigned because they do kind of tend to drift away from each other.
Yeah.
And in Zebra apps, they drifted quite a bit.
Yeah. It's like tending a garden. If you have a garden and you don't cut the weeds and you don't feed the soil or water the plants, then it would run out of control or die. And I think that is part of leaders, not necessarily only formal leaders, but also informal leaders, to kind of look at the system, look at the people, and see what do we need here to let this thrive, and be constantly on the lookout for that.
Yeah. Yes, and I also love your focus on the behavioral part, because I think that's where it gets more tangible. It can be, I think, really hard for an employee to look at a corporate value and know what that means to them. Yeah. So it's just like, okay, so we're supposed to be curious, but how do I do that in the way that you want it, right? So I think being very clear about the behaviors. Also, as you said, like, what do we do? Well, I don't know if that's what you said, but what do we do if people do not have that behavior?
Right. And also, what are the systems in place that constantly promote curiosity?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
there might be practices where you always start with clarifying questions before giving. So if you have a discussion, you always start with clarifying questions. That's just a thing you do. That's a practice you hold, so that the behavior that you want emerges. So it's not helpful to give people a picture, a manifest, and saying you should behave this way. And then you're being thrown into a meeting where you're unable to show those behaviors. It's really about the practices and the principles that people constantly do, so that the right behavior emerges and the culture is created.
Okay. I think let's wrap up the book swap session with that, and talk a bit about writing and publishing a book, because that's also something we would like to just talk to you about, since you've published 2 books. And we know, because we talked about this in the pre-call, that you decided to self-publish. Will you tell us a bit about why you chose that and how it's been?
Yeah. So the first book, Formula X, that I co-authored with Rini van Solingen, came through a traditional publisher. And that was helpful because I had no idea what it would take to write a book and get it into stores. I had really no clue, and I could just focus on the content and getting it published was all up to the publisher. I did discover though that the publisher, even though they do have some marketing channels which are nice, it's still up to you to promote the book. And they also take 50% cut on all the revenue that's making. Well, I cannot live from book revenue, like book profits. Like, it's not, unless you're one of the top 1% writers, it's going to be very hard to make a living from writing books. But still, they take a lot of royalties and they don't do much for it. Generally. Then the second factor is that technology has been rapidly accelerating over the last year, and self-publishing just has become a lot more easy. So it was pretty easy to do the layout, for example. I just got a really nice tool for it, and I did it myself. I'm a perfectionist with my books anyway. So I either send a long email to the publisher with every page where commas are wrong or spaces are wrong, or I can just fix them myself. There's just as much work. The thing generates a PDF. I upload the PDF into Amazon KDP, which is a self-publishing platform. you write the description of the book, and it's published in the store. And it's also print on demand, which I really like, because this whole concept of having large warehouses where thousands of books pile up until somebody buys them, and you need to do a huge print run when you're out of boxes, is just crazy. Like these days, Amazon has actually disrupted the market there. The print on demand prices and costs are very low, so it's also good for sustainability. If one person in Japan buys a copy of my book, it gets printed in Japan, it gets put in an envelope in Japan, and then shipped locally. It doesn't need to come from a Dutch warehouse and shipped across the world. So those are just some of the factors. The technology is there. It's not that hard, and the promotion still needs to happen anyway.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious for Unblock. Did you have an editor help you?
Yeah, I just hired a freelance editor.
Okay.
Paid them for just doing the final edits. Yeah. And there's marketplaces out there where you can find, because a lot of these publishing companies, they're going down. So they're shrinking. So the people that work there, the talented work there, they are now all freelancing, and they put themselves on these marketplaces where you can just say, hey, you know what? I need an editor, or I need a cover designer, or I need a proofreader. Like these things, these are just services you can buy yourself.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
It is very helpful to know. Yeah.
I think in our publishing experience, we this is our first book, so much like you, we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
And then it is helpful to kind of get on a train that goes to a destination, and experience that whole part. Also, you have published two different kinds of books. You've published a fictional story, and you've published more of a business book format.
Practical book, yeah.
Yes. What was your experience with the two different kinds of books?
Yeah. First of all, it's good to note that not everybody likes business fables. So we still consistently get feedback of people that are like, maybe it's about a third of the people they cannot read a business fable. They're like, just give me the theory. I don't want to learn all these characters, and it's not for everyone. But a lot of other people really like it. So with Formula X, the good thing about Formula X is that it doesn't feel like homework. And the same for Maneuvering Monday. So what we found is that when leaders, for example, want to give a Christmas present, they just buy a whole box of these books and send them to all their colleagues. Because it doesn't feel like homework. People can just have some inspiring story that you can connect back to. That's easy to read. So that's the advantage. The disadvantage, of course, is that it's nice to be inspired, but it doesn't create any change. Unless you start doing things. And then if you really want to figure out what to do and how to do it, then you need a different kind of book. So that's why I also wanted to write the other book, because I just wanted to package all the things I've learned over the years of the work that we've been doing with leadership teams into something that people could actually try and use. So they're both built on the same philosophy, but they have different ways of expressing it.
That's a very, very interesting approach, I think, or like point that it's great because there's maybe some, you can recognize yourself. There's like this story, there's these characters, but it maybe doesn't inspire going out, or maybe it will, but it doesn't give you like the practical tools. And I think we had that same, as I said earlier, we did plan to incorporate tools in our book, but then we were advised not to. So our setup is that we have the podcast that will give you all the tools.
Yeah.
But then you also have to listen. So it is a bit tricky, but I think that that's how we kind of solved that. So you can still get
in Formula X. In Formula X, we did it. We had a very light theory chapter in the back. And this was inspired, I think, by Patrick Lencioni's books, like 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is like 80% story, 20% theory. So for those who didn't like the story, just skip to the theory and just read the theory chapters. Still, the theory chapters are very light and very short, so it still doesn't get the depth. Yeah, maybe you can get people to download 1-page things of all the moves that Marie made, or 5 things to think about in your organization. You can maybe create a template online where people can go and get more.
That is still on our list of something,
of course,
exactly, that we would like to do. Originally, we had this idea of like the toolbox, the podcast, and the book.
Or Maneuvering Tuesday. Maneuvering Tuesday, the next book,
Yeah. Oh, true. We have 7 books in total.
There you go.
To come, yeah, true.
Another, Jurriaan, you also recorded your own audiobook for Unblock.
Yeah.
And I both listened to your book and also read it because I think that gives you a completely different experience. But also just you did such a good job with your audiobook. What are some of the things that you learned or tricks for how to record a good audiobook?
Yeah, it is. Well, first of all, if you're going to do it, it is actually pretty hard. I know, AK, you're recording Maneuver Monday. Is that correct?
We should have done this. Like, we should have done this episode half a year ago, so I could have gotten this input before I actually recorded.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
I recorded our book in before. So
yeah, it's hard. It's hard to keep the energy up. Just have to realize that I couldn't do more than 2 or 3 hours at a day. The editing is a lot of work. There's software out there nowadays that does a lot of voice recognition, so it makes it very easy to edit your book just as if you're editing a document. So that's nice. But still, it's a lot of work because you can endlessly tinker with how you're saying a sentence. So it can take a lot of time if you have time.
Yeah,
I would say, yeah, just be mindful of your energy level. I always did some warm up exercises for my voice to just keep articulation well. I mean, I have a Dutch accent, so it will always be a little bit strange. And there's also words in the book that I just struggle with to say well. So I just had to repeat that many times.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I do always when I'm listening to a book, I always appreciate that's when it's spoken in by an author, because then you know that they're energetic about the things that they care about, rather than having this default standard voice actor that is doing this for their day job.
Exactly. I think it's just you have to accept and get over, like in my case, that there is a Danish accent and that's just how it is. And it's still like, as long as people can understand what I say, it's okay. That was one of my initial, like, should I try to do this in another accent? But then I was like,
no.
It also has to
way.
be authentic. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But absolutely, I think energy is tricky, and especially also having to listen so many times to make sure that you don't have any like things that messed up.
Yeah,
because that was my learning, that I did everything in one take. Like, I sat down and I recorded, not in one day, but like over several days. But I tried to edit as I went. So if I said something wrong, I would right away like go back and do it again while I was recording the first time, instead of recording everything and then listening to everything and fixing in the second listen. But I still found out when I listened that I missed so many errors when I did it.
Yeah.
So I had to still redo it after.
I do wonder if in 2 or 3 years from now, this is still a problem, because AI voice generation has just become so good over the last year that, I've used some tools where we just record a really short video of yourself, and you give it a script and it just generates video with your voice. It's really scary. But it does open up the possibility for a book to be audio generated from scratch. So yeah, I don't know, like maybe, and even the tool I use Descript. It does allow you to just replace full words or a couple words and just generate a replacement of that sentence if you made a mistake, rather than needing to re-record the whole thing. So it is becoming, maybe this problem will be solved soon.
I can tell. Last year when we did the last season of Maneuvering Monday, the first podcast, I tried doing like the story parts, the story episodes. I tried to do an AI AK voice, and it was still very much like a robot, and it was a little bit scary.
Yeah, it is scary.
Yeah. But I think that improves all the time. So it's probably, as you say, in a few years, it's gonna be great. Yeah.
That was a hilarious experience, because like after like 5 minutes or so, the voice would become like more and more like low and creepy sounding
and slow. It's like in the beginning it keeps up, but then the longer the section is that you read, the worse it gets. Yeah.
Funny.
And it was a good thing that I like listened to it before publishing it, because the first 5 minutes were fine, but then it just got really weird after 5 minutes.
I want us to address the big question towards the end.
The meaning of life.
The meaning,
the big question. The question.
Wow. Question.
What is the question?
Well, let's try to solve that now.
We can keep the scope to work.
Okay. The meaning of work.
The meaning of work.
What's the point of all of this?
What is the point? Why do we do it? And what is the state of it? Part of my brain keeps thinking about like the major global movements that we're seeing. I would say changes in politics and culture that we're experiencing right now. We have more tension globally. And in this whole context, is work getting more or less blocked? Does it influence how work feels like?
Yeah, I'm not the person to answer that, honestly, but it's a really good question. I think what I recently was in Hungary for the European Organization Design Forum conference, and I really liked the title that I picked. And the title for the conference was Design for Turbulence. So rather than resisting it, or rather than trying to ignore it or trying to push against it, just accept that there's going to be a lot of turbulence in your organization, outside of your organization, in the market, and you just have to be ready for it. So that means that you have to adopt work practices that are highly adaptive, that you should be able to steer the ship into a different direction quickly if needed. Some companies have proven that they could do it during the COVID sense. It's like sometimes that's actually a really positive example. One of the speakers was I think he was a Finnish professor. Forgot his name. Sorry if you're listening. But he had a whole speech about how crises and turbulence actually are often an opportunity for new business models and new products to thrive. So that's also a thing to keep in mind, that actually turbulence and crisis could create a lot of opportunity. And it's all about, just making your organization ready for that. And that does sometimes mean that it needs to be unblocked. If things are stuck in a certain state and we have no way of evolving the organization or improving it, then it will break the moment that you hit some turbulent air. So yeah, it's something to keep in mind of. And as leaders, try not to be overwhelmed. I know, for example, last year or 2 years ago, as a consultancy, we had a rough year because we found that a lot of our big corporate clients, they started tightening their belts because they were like bracing for impact.
Yeah.
If you keep the airplane metaphor up. But now we're actually pretty busy, where we see a lot of clients. The turbulence is still there, but they just accept that this is going to be a long-term state, and they're now starting to open their eyes again and opening their systems for outside help, which is a good news for us consultants, but also acknowledges that sometimes the outside help or the outside perspective is what can get you where you need to go. So yeah, I'm just happy that is going on. That's it.
That makes sense. And if our listeners are to try one thing at home that can unblock their workplace, what should they try?
Well, first they should buy Maneuvering Monday. Then they should buy Unblock, of course. And then from there, again, it's a really broad question because you can go all sorts of places. But if you're a leader, I would just start the conversation with the people around you. It doesn't need to be complicated, but if you have a sense that stuff are blocked, gather the room and ask people why. This curiosity comes back. Yeah. Why are we blocked? What is going on here? It is actually what Marie is doing, and what the leaders in Maneuvering Monday are not doing is really descending, quote unquote, to where the work is happening and going to start talking to people so that you get a sense of what's going on. And then we have a good sense of what's going on. Try running some experiments to get stuff loose, to loosen up stuff. Bringing proposals that are and asking people to consent to it, seeing if it's safe to try, and just start making changes. Sometimes that is the only thing that needs to happen for a whole system to start moving.
I think we'll have to figure out if we can do like a bundle deal, Maneuvering Monday and Unblock.
Oh, yeah,
you have the problems and the solutions.
Yeah, if you put it on Amazon, we could do it. But unfortunately, you're traditionally published, so it might be harder.
It's true. Maybe the next book.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't think people care about the discount that much.
No,
you can just tell them that they need to buy both, and they'll buy both.
Yes. that is the message, dear listeners. Buy both.
Yeah.
Well, Jurriaan, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really great conversation. I'm curious what we can do together next.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, it's exciting, and looking forward to Maneuvering Tuesday.
Thank you.